I'm Caroline Hyde. This is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, the US hits Russian officials with sanctions over what Washington says was an unprecedented attempt to interfere with the presidential election. Plus, the rise of the robots with US jobs in the crosshairs. We'll discuss whether humans and AI can peacefully coexist inside America's offices. And we'll take a look at biggest tech breakthroughs of 2016, from personal AI assistants to reusable rockets becoming a reality. But first, to our lead. The Obama administration has imposed sanctions against Russian officials and state institutions in retaliation for hacking Democratic Party emails. It's the first public retaliation for the US officials have said was an unprecedented attempt to interfere with the 2016 president election. We spoke with Tara Mahler, former CIA analyst and now senior policy advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project, along with Bloomberg's foreign policy reporter, Nick Wadhams.
There are 9 people and entities mentioned on this sanctions list. Crucially, there are 2 really big names. One is the FSB, which is sort of the inheritor agency to the KGB, so Russia's prime intelligence agency. The other is its military intelligence service, the GRU. So, I mean, we've been speaking to analysts all afternoon who say, you know, you won't necessarily see individuals at the GRU targeted as a result of being on that, being mentioned there, though individual members of the GRU are actually mentioned as among the 9. But it really is sending a huge signal from the Obama administration saying, pointing out the sort of seriousness of their intent to name and shame Russian individuals and entities as they press ahead looking for ways to punish Russia for the election-related hacks.
Tara, the name and shame approach has been used by the Obama administration before, but could there be any covert actions going on as well?
Absolutely. You see this move today. This is the Obama administration's parting shot against Putin. This is their overt parting shot. The diplomatic sanctions, the expulsion of diplomats, and the economic sanctions that you're seeing them publicly announce. Having said that, that does not close the door to covert measures. That does not close the door to potential covert cyber measures. And we may or may not know about those if and when they happen. Obama, in his statement today, did imply that this might not be the last of the retaliation from the United States on this, which would seem the days in office are waning here. So it seems that if he's going to do anything else, if this administration is going to do anything else, we're probably not going to see it. The Russians today came out saying that they, too, are likely to retaliate. So one thing to watch is to see if the United States faces any additional cyber attacks from the Russians in the upcoming month, and then whether or not the Trump administration rolls back any of this when President-elect Trump takes office later in January.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, the fact that we are hearing already from the fact that Russia might bring these countermeasures as soon as tomorrow, what are the people you're speaking to reacting in terms of the retaliation? Potentially they're bracing themselves from Russia.
Well, I mean, what we would likely know about in that case would be an expulsion of American diplomats. So, you know, these things tend to operate on a tit-for-tat basis. You expel my diplomats, I'm going to expel yours, too. So that would be a very public move. You know, I think one of the things, though, that the Obama administration was weighing in the last couple of months, these are discussions they've been having for quite some time, is how far down this path they want to go. Because if they continue with covert actions as well and press ahead with actions that would perhaps attack Russian infrastructure or wipe hard drives owned by hackers or delete their Bitcoin accounts or whatever it is, I mean, then you're really getting into almost a cyber war type of situation, and that could escalate much more quickly. So this isn't just the sort of expulsion of diplomats, which sort of has history, you know, there's a long historic precedent for that over years and years. But when you come to really escalating cyber war between 2 major world powers, you know, that's something the Obama administration and the Trump administration would want to consider very carefully.
I mean, interesting you mentioned the Trump administration there. We've heard that, of course, these sanctions were in many parts bipartisan. We saw across the benches either side wanting to push for such action. But it looks as though Donald Trump himself perhaps has been a little bit cooler to want to see any rapprochement of Russia. We heard from him discuss this just yesterday. Have a listen.
I think we ought to get on with our lives. I think that computers have complicated lives very greatly. The whole, age of computer has made it where nobody knows exactly what's going on. We have speed, we have a lot of other things, but I'm not sure you have the kind of security that you need.
Tara, he sort of says everything and nothing there. The fact that he wants people to get on with their lives, though. But what do you think is going to be the reaction of Donald Trump if he soon moves into leading the country? Will he unwind all of this?
Well, I think what you saw today is a move that needs to be taken seriously. It's sort of unprecedented, and an executive order was revised to include deterrence against anybody messing with any of our election infrastructure. That's now included in the executive order. So if any individual in the future is to take any sort of cyber action that affects the election in any way, whether that's the leaking of emails or attacks on election systems themselves, that is now part of U.S. policy and in President Obama's executive order that we will retaliate with sanctions. Now, it remains to be seen how Donald Trump will react. I mean, to say that computers complicate our lives doesn't really seem like a policy response. The reality is cybersecurity is one of the foremost threats the United States faces in terms of cyber attacks on our infrastructure, cyber attacks in terms of economic espionage on private companies, on our facilities like the Pentagon, on our nuclear facilities potentially. This is a serious issue. So to just sort of brush it aside with the remarks last night doesn't really demonstrate a clear cyber policy. And I think it will be interesting to see what Donald Trump does in response to this Russian activity when he takes office. And also, the action taken by the Obama administration today is not just about Russia. Part of imposing sanctions, diplomatic or economic, in response to a problematic behavior, in this case, a cyber attack that impacted DNC servers and emails, is to deter future non-state actors, future state actors from doing this sort of activity again. So taking a position on this is key to prevent that, not just in terms of punishing Russia. And I think that, this might actually help the Trump administration because perhaps we'll see less non-state actors meddling in terms of hacking into email servers like this.
And Tara, just to take it global for us for a moment, because of course we've got French elections, German elections, Netherlands elections, to name but a few next year. And we know that potentially Russia acting within domestic politics is not just limited to the United States. There were reports coming from the UK press over the weekend that maybe the United Kingdom is exposed as well. How much do you think this is a global issue? Will other countries come in behind the United States?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see whether or not, particularly with the administration sanctions that went into effect today, if European countries will follow suit, and they will also designate those individuals and those entities and not, engage in financial transactions and trade and whatnot. So, again, you might see Europe take action if they're the victim of the cyber attack. I'll be curious to see if Europe jumps on board with the United States on this. They may very well, because they are going to be future victims as well. So it's in everyone's best interest to make these multilateral and take a firm stand on this together.
That was Tara Marler, Senior Policy Advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project, and Bloomberg's foreign policy reporter, Nick Wadhams. This week, the US accused 3 Chinese hackers of making more than $4 million in illegal profits after hacking the servers of several New York law firms. It's alleged they bought shares in at least 5 companies before deals were announced. Some of the transactions involved chipmaker Intel and drug maker Intermune. The SEC filed a parallel civil complaint and is pushing to freeze their assets. Coming up, holiday cheer echoes for Amazon. Why tech gadgets won out as shoppers got mobile. And a reminder that all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays at 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. The consumer came roaring back this holiday season. US consumer confidence came in better than expected in December, making its biggest gain in more than a decade. Could the boost in sentiment pay off for the retail sector during the crucial holiday season? Well, certainly there were signs of consumer strength in the online space. Amazon reported its best holiday season yet, having shipped 1 billion items. We dug into the online retailer and its record sales of Alexa devices with Bloomberg News consumer reporter Shannon Pettypiece and Bloomberg editor-at-large Corey Johnson.
Amazon is very fast and loose with the numbers they throw out there. The fact that this is the biggest holiday ever, if it wasn't, it'd be a disaster because the expectation was for 25% year-over-year sales growth, and that includes Amazon Web Services. But they told us they sold 9 times more Alexa devices as last year. but we don't know how many they sold last year, so we don't really know what that number means. And the company is very reticent to release any sort of actual figures out there. Now, Mark Mahaney at RBC Capital Markets estimated about mid-year the company had sold about $1 billion top line of Alexa products for perhaps very, very little profit. But the notion that could be a much larger number now coming into the end of this year, let's say it's 3 times that number, that starts to be a significant number, maybe not an Amazon scale where the company is expected to do about $45 billion in revenues for the quarter. But still, selling a lot of these things is good, not just because it works for Amazon, but it creates a flywheel effect where people use the Alexa. One of the things that Mahaney found out with a study they did earlier this year is the more people have Alexa or Amazon Echo devices, the more they use Amazon. Yeah. So if you can put these things and get people to pay for it in their house, they end up being more frequent customers in the same way that Amazon Prime customers become more frequent customers of Amazon.
More addicted to the ecosystem. Shannon, great to have you on the show on this festive series. Part of the day, but give us a sense of the mobile element that you're covering. How much there seems to be a real buoyancy and how much we're all getting geeky about the way we shop.
Oh, well, yeah, and I think before the big brick and mortar retailers used to talk about their app, and I think people kind of glazed over, but now it's the battle of the apps, really, between these retailers. They know that consumers are only going to be using a couple apps on their phone. Amazon is really dominating that space. Maybe there's a couple other retailers who can make a dent there to have, you know, the app on your phone that you're using in mobile in real time, ordering things while you're lying in bed at night, in the store, price checking from your app. So I think more and more, the debate is not going to be around who has the best website, but who has the best app and the best mobile platform, because that's really where consumers are moving in the retail space.
So are brick and mortar playing catch up? Are they getting the right mobile offering? Are they managing to lock in some of this payment, Shannon?
I mean, I think they're obviously doing better than they were a couple years ago. But, I mean, when you listen to Corey talking about Amazon and the sales of Alexa and the way Amazon just continues to dominate this space and is drawing more and more consumers into their ecosystem with Prime, with Alexa and Echo, the harder and harder it gets for brick and mortar retailers. It's sort of like Amazon's always 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of them. As soon as they get a great website, Amazon's got a great app. As soon as they get to, 2-3 day shipping, Amazon's doing 1 hour shipping. They get a good app. Now they've got, something like Alexa to compete with. So, I mean, they're trying, obviously, but and they're making some progress, but I don't know if there's any signs they're slowing Amazon down.
It was also interesting, if you went through the press release today, Amazon released, again, without any actual numbers, but they went through category by category of their top-selling products, and they were wonderfully random and weird. But I actually went through probably about 30 of those items, and what I noticed was these were really cheap items. These were, it was a power cord for $7.99, and it was a bathtub baby toys for $6.45. Or something. The prices were so low that the expectation might be that Amazon has virtually no margin in those things. But by driving so much volume and having just tiny, tiny bits of margin there, they're taking money away from other retailers, as Shannon's pointing out, and that changes the nature of retail to push it more towards Amazon.
I think that's really fascinating, the way in which we're buying. Who is won out in this, particularly today, Shannon? Consumer confidence best in 15 years. I was really intrigued by not only the breakdown from a generation point of view. Consumers seem to be pretty positive if they're over 35, but millennials, they're not sounding too confident. But also, if you're a clothes seller right now, it's still not a pretty place to be.
Right, and to mention to Corey's point, Amazon's now getting into apparel. So we've got one more thing, that retailers have to compete with. This year for apparel, I mean, I don't know if it's going to be catastrophic, but it's not going to be awesome. And given where the consumer's at, it could be awesome. But the consumer's just not wanting to spend on apparel. There's not a newness. There's not innovation going on there. There's a lot more excitement happening in other areas like tech right now, where they, rather be spending their money. And so the retailers were forced to offer bigger discounts than ever this year. So maybe you were able to get the same number of presents for the same number of people, but you paid less and the retailers got a smaller margin on it. So I don't think we're going to see nothing really has changed, at least this holiday season compared to last season, I don't think. Maybe we'll see an incremental benefit, but not a huge boost for the retailers.
Let me also say that 63% of millennial voters voted against Donald Trump. So that may have actually a big weighting in terms of the optimism that those people feel. That if 63% of a populace voted against somebody and that person wins, they're not feeling good about anything right now. So the time period in which they were polled was during this Trump transition team coming together. And I think that may have had an effect on the consumer confidence for millennials, maybe not affecting the way they're actually spending money.
Bloomberg editor-at-large Corey Johnson and Bloomberg consumer reporter Shannon Pettypiece. As we just discussed, the Echo has proved to be a massive success for Amazon. The AI-powered smart speaker shows there's a lucrative consumer market for voice-activated assistants in the home, something that Google and Apple can no longer ignore. Bloomberg's Caitlin Meehan reports.
The top 5 most valuable tech companies in the world are all betting big on the success of virtual assistants that respond to voice commands. The race really started with Amazon's surprise hit, the Echo. It's powered by a digital assistant named Alexa.
Alexa, how many championships has Dan Marino won?
Dan Marino has won 0 championships.
Alexa, how many Oscars has Alec Baldwin won?
Alec Baldwin has won 0
Alexa, stop. Well played, Marino.
Echo debuted in mid-2015, and by April 2016, consumer researchers reported that Amazon had already sold more than 3 million devices. And it was cheap, selling for the relatively low price of $180 a pop. But the real payoff was in Amazon's core e-commerce business.
We think it's one of the faster growing businesses for Amazon, and more importantly, it actually adds into the ecosystem that Amazon has, where they already have a bunch of traffic coming to their website, but this is a chance for Amazon to grab the traffic, which is not online.
Echo owners are spending an estimated 10% more time on Amazon.com after buying the smart speaker, and Amazon stock has popped more than 70% since the Echo came out in the US. So it's no surprise Google wanted in on the action.
Credit to the team at Amazon for creating a lot of excitement in this space. We've been thinking about our own unique approach, and we are getting ready to launch something later this year.
That something was Google Home. It hit the market in October, priced $50 less than the Echo, and loaded with Google's own conversational interface, which leaves us with the elephant in the room.
Hi, it's me. It sure is great to be on the Mac.
Apple's assistant Siri has been out for 5 years now, since it debuted on the iPhone 4S, but its use has been mainly limited to the iPhone, which could be a problem for Apple. Because by some estimates, only 23% of US smartphone owners actually use voice assistants like Siri on a weekly basis.
It's so important of a category, and Amazon has so proven that there's a customer demand and that it's a sexy new kind of interface for information that Apple would be insane not to get out there with a product that's similar. But it's all about the implementation, and it's also going to be a real disadvantage not to have been first.
But then again, Apple wasn't first to the smartphone or the tablet market either. And back in September, Bloomberg reported that Apple is in fact pushing ahead with an Echo-style competitor. So, we can only expect this market to keep growing in 2017, with IDC forecasting shipments jumping 130% to 21 million.
Caitlin Meehan with that report. And we'll bring you more on the breakthrough tech of 2016, including the hits and the misses in the quest for reusable rockets. That's a little later. In deal news this week, Volkswagen is making another move to expand Europe's biggest car maker from manufacturing into mobility services. VW is buying Canadian mobile parking payment operator Pay by Phone. Terms of the deal weren't disclosed. Pay by Phone has processed more than $250 million in transactions this year with 12.5 million customers. The move is part of Chief Executive Officer Matthias Müller's response to industry-wide technology developments, such as mobility services, automated driving, and electric powering systems, as the company emerges from its diesel emissions cheating scandal. Tesla, which acquired Solar City earlier this year, and Panasonic are stepping up their partnership, announcing they will begin production of solar cells and modules next year at a plant in Buffalo, a city in upstate New York. Panasonic is investing roughly $250 million in the venture. The announcement underscores deepening ties between the two companies. They are jointly building a $5 billion lithium-ion gigafactory in Nevada. After the break, we'll find out how a robotics whiz is helping the immobile become mobile with thought alone. That special report from Chile next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg technology. Jerusalem-based software firm Mobileye announced a partnership with HERE, the mapping consortium made up of German automakers. This is one of several partnerships forged between tech and auto firms this year, as self-driving technology rapidly grows. Under the deal, Mobileye's software, which uses sensors and data analysis to find a car's position on the road in real time, but it will be integrated into HERE's navigational mapping technology. Shares of Mobileye rose on the news, the most since August. This year, Bloomberg Businessweek's Ashley Vance has crisscrossed the globe to see how pioneers in different countries are pushing the limits of technology. In the season finale of Hello World, he travels to Chile to see their unique take on the incubator concept. Take a look.
It's called the Idea Factory, or IF, for those into the whole brevity thing. They support tech with a do-gooder bent. Politicians stop by to schmooze. Kids get a chance to learn. It's not a factory designed to build the next Google or Facebook. IF focuses on things for Chile and South America. And they've got hyper-local branches hidden in unexpected corners of Santiago.
There are tech incubators all over the world, but you won't find many in a neighborhood like this. IF has another building here that's been set up to inspire local youngsters and give budding inventors a helping hand.
Here in Recoleta, things are a bit more lively than in Palo Alto. And it suits the place. I showed up on a demo day when kids from the neighborhood pour through the gates to check out IF's gadgets. There was plenty of eye candy, but nothing beat this.
Hello, robots.
It's like every other video conferencing robot on a stick, but this one is basically lethal.
That's so cool.
All of the gadgets come from this man, Rodrigo Quevedo. He's something of a local celebrity and has Kanye West levels of passion.
Con el mismo esfuerzo, con el mismo corazón, con la misma inteligencia, hagamos algo, pero que sea para todo el mundo. Entonces, ¿a quién ayudamos? ¿A quién ayudamos? ¿Quiénes son los que más necesitan? Los que no se pueden mover, los que no mueven brazos y piernas. Bueno, hagamos algo para que se muevan. ¿Qué hacemos? Con señales cerebrales. ¡Ya!
Rodrigo was an officer in the Chilean army and then an engineer until he had a revelation and became a robotics entrepreneur. His most inspired invention is this wheelchair. People can control it by tilting their head or making a gesture. Soon, Rodrigo hopes it'll move by thought alone, by reading impulses from a brainwave monitor.
Ahora, ¿quieres probar la silla?
Sí, sí, sí.
Bienvenido. Ahora estamos haciendo todo mucho más pequeño y este es el primer modelo funcional.
Rodrigo's helpers were surprisingly gentle as they gave me the power of telekinesis.
Y para encender el sistema, hace 1.
That's how I turn it on?
Sí.
3 blinks.
Así.
Oh, it's like a genie.
Fuerte. 1, 2, 3.
Oh my God.
Hacia atrás. Hacia atrás. Hacia atrás.
That's crazy. It's amazing.
Es fácil.
And you can catch the full episode of Hello World this weekend on Bloomberg Television. Plenty more still to come, including man versus machine. We take a deep dive on what a more automated world means for your job prospects in the coming year. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can now listen to Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the US on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde. This year's $85 billion deal between Time Warner and AT&T has many wondering if mergers like this will be the new normal going into 2017. Network owners are under growing pressure as they continue to lose customers to online services like Netflix. So has cable TV reached a tipping point? We put the question to Bloomberg editor-at-large Corey Johnson and Jerry Smith, Bloomberg News media reporter.
You think about the television industry, it's sort of like a slowly melting ice cube. There's still about 98 million people in the U.S. that subscribe to pay television, but it loses a couple million subscribers each year. And eventually, you know, media companies are starting to look around and say, you know, this isn't an industry that's growing anymore. Maybe we need to partner up and find someone, whether it's another distributor or partner with, do a merger with another media company potentially. You know, everyone's sort of looking around in this fast-changing landscape and looking for some security.
Corey, not an industry that's growing TV, but there is an industry that's growing on the back of it, the likes of Hulu, Netflix. Are they really the disruptors in all of this?
I think certainly so, and I think this over-the-top notion of the way that people are subscribing to TV very differently and viewing TV very differently is a clear and present danger to the existing media companies, and I think they know that, right? We can see the responses. Companies like Time Warner that have had great success with their HBO Go product, from what we can see, and other companies struggling with these things. But I think there's also a belief that under a Trump administration that they will be much more business friendly and let businesses do what they will. Look, the reason that some of these deals have been opposed by the Justice Department and that some of these deals didn't even happen because they knew they'd be opposed by the Justice Department isn't because there were more Democrats on the FCC than there were the Republicans, or that because of course there will always be that kind of imbalance, one party and the other, as mandated. And that the Justice Department is different under a different administration. The reason they oppose it is because it was bad for the consumers. And that the effect on consumers won't be different based on who's in office, but the approval of these things might be different.
Jerry, we just heard Corey talking about the way in which the older media companies have responded. Some of them offering skinnier bundles, the fact that you don't need all 100,000 channels or options, maybe fewer. Is that catching on?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing more and more of that. You know, just recently, AT&T introduced DirecTV Now, which has a starting price of $35 for 100 channels, although the price eventually goes up. But, you know, it remains to be seen how popular these are, but if they do catch on, there's a real threat to a lot of these smaller cable channels. You know, some of these media companies have more than 20 cable channels, and a lot of them get very little viewership. And if, you know, these packages catch on where there's only 20 or 30 channels in them, we'll start to see a lot of those marginal channels potentially get shut down.
And potentially we'll see fewer of those names next year, Corey. We might see them eating each other.
And it matters, too, from an editorial standpoint, right? On the news basis, we want to have lots of providers of news, not very few. From an entertainment basis, we've seen some great entertainment come out of Netflix with House of Cards. We've seen Narcos has been very successful. Luke Cage has been terrific. Shout out to my friend Cheo who produced that show, but it's a fantastic show. We've seen the same thing out of Amazon, where we've seen Man in the High Castle, Transparent, some shows that would not have seen the light of day if it were not for these experiments in other places to broadcast, and our society is richer for it. So the notion of consolidation should be something that concerns consumers, not just the balance sheets of the businesses involved.
But Jerry, so far we've seen the older guard consolidating. What about the new kids on the block? Could we see Amazon? It's got a lot of cash it could put to work. We know that Jeff Bezos doesn't mind splashing that cash. Would we potentially see them eating up some of the older content providers? You know, I mean, I think that's there's always some speculation going on. I mean, there was speculation about Netflix and Disney at one point this year. You know, another company we haven't mentioned is BuzzFeed. NBC has invested $400 million in BuzzFeed, and I think we're going to start to see more and more of these old media companies and these digital publishers joining forces, because the old media companies want their younger audience, and the BuzzFeeds of the world really like the money that's in television.
Well, but to that point, the BuzzFeed deal is a G round. It's the 8th round of venture capital they've done, not including the seed money that they've taken in. Netflix is a business that does not generate a lot of free cash flow. We might expect that the same is true about Hulu. We don't know their financials. We don't know the financials of Amazon Prime. But right now, it's still a frothy market. There's still very high valuations. These businesses can be supported by Wall Street when they can't support their own operations. So I think that's a thing that could dissuade investments, right? If the rules of the road were to change with the FCC and Netflix costs were to rise a lot because they use so much of the internet traffic they don't really pay for, that could really affect the valuation. Disney could get a much cheaper deal under different FCC rules. Right now, Netflix can sustain themselves thanks to Wall Street, but not thanks to their own efforts. That sort of keeps these acquisitions from happening anytime soon. That was Bloomberg editor-at-large Corey Johnson and Bloomberg News media reporter Jerry Smith.
Donald Trump has credited SoftBank's Masayoshi Son for bringing back 5,000 jobs to the US. The president-elect announced this week that Sprint will create or return the positions to the United States. The company is yet to determine where the jobs will be located, but they will be in customer care, sales and other functions. The announcement came weeks after Japan's Sun pledged to invest $50 billion into the US economy, and the jobs are part of Sun's overall 50,000 job commitment.
So we have a combination of Sprint for 5,000 jobs, and that's coming from all over the world, and they're coming back into the United States, which is a nice change. And also OneWeb, 3,000 jobs. That's a new company. And it was done through Masa, and a terrific guy, and we appreciate it.
In large part, it has been trade and globalization that have been blamed for the widespread loss of manufacturing jobs in the US, but some are pointing to a different culprit: robots. With driverless cars and chatbots doing things that humans normally do, how much will technology and automation disrupt industry as we know it? And, well, can the American workforce stem the tide? We discussed these questions with Dennis Yang, CEO of Udemy, an online learning platform aimed at professional adults.
Especially in 2016, we've heard a lot of the discussion form around trade policy, globalization, and immigration. But in reality, if you look at the numbers, a lot of the job displacement actually comes from technology automation. Let's take U.S. manufacturing as an example. Manufacturing as an industry within the U.S., if you look at the total output volume, is actually near its all-time high. But over the course of the last several decades, the actual number of people that that industry has employed is actually down over 7 million jobs. And the vast majority of that is actually due to technology automation, not necessarily from globalization.
So productivity seems to be on the up thanks to robotics. And there was a great study done a few years ago coming out of Oxford saying that almost half US jobs are actually at risk due to machines. Are we going through perhaps a bit of a Bill Gates situation here where there's actually underestimating what might happen in the short term, underestimating what might happen in longer term? In fact, could this be more than half of the jobs, or indeed is this not? What do you think of the numbers?
I actually think it's going to be underestimated. I think it's one of those things where technology, as a general trend, it tends to accelerate. It's different from, say, immigration policy or globalization, where you can create some public policies to stem it or to change it. Whereas in technology, if you think about it, not only does it tend to accelerate faster, you can't uninvent things. So you think about the nature and the pace of change, things are always going to appear a little bit faster than we expect them to.
So you think actually shorter than Oxford at the moment put out, look, in the next decade or two, you think it could be sooner than that?
It definitely could be. And think about just this year alone, some of the big items that we were discussing in sort of the mainstream. One was around autonomous vehicles. That's going to have a huge impact on the trucking industry, which is one of the biggest employers within the US. And the other one is around self-serve kiosks and all sorts of quick serve restaurants. I mean, between those two, we're talking millions and millions of jobs that could be affected. And that's just on the low end with more routine work. And as technology gets a little bit more powerful, you have to think that it's going to be able to displace more high-end jobs as well.
So, of course, Udemy, what you helm as CEO, is helping reskill or upskill workers. Is this what the answer is? Does the government, say Donald Trump coming in just less than a month, will we see a focus on reskilling, or actually should there be a larger safety net for those who can't be, potentially?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a combination of a bunch of different things, but for sure, retraining and education has to be part of that conversation, and that's certainly what we do. So if you think about it, there are two things that we think about. The first thing is this notion of lifelong learning. So people are working a little bit longer. A lot of the conversation around education is education really only in the early stages of an individual's life, but if you think about it, because the world of work is changing so quickly, people need to constantly learn new skills. So that's one piece. And the second piece is the most important valuable skill that an individual can have going forward is the ability to learn something new, because it's going to be really, really difficult to predict the future world of work.
Dennis, you're coming in here and you're talking about this. I want to know how much in 2017 will some of the startups, of course, we've seen some of the fighting back from particularly disrupted industries. We've seen the effects worldwide, not just here in the United States, but in Germany, in the United Kingdom, taxi companies fighting off the likes of Uber. But change is coming. You talk about this fourth industrial sort of revolution. Do startups and the companies that are doing the disrupting need to talk out more about this and talk about the ways in which people can be helped who might indeed lose their jobs?
Yes, absolutely. I think that needs to be part of the broader conversation. I think it's a little bit different from an education standpoint insofar as lifelong learning is really a new segment of education, because in the past, most people think of education in sort of the early years, whether it's K through 12, traditional higher education, if you're lucky enough to have a degree or diploma. They really didn't consider what happens afterwards. And again, that goes back to this notion of lifelong learning. The need to constantly reskill and upskill the skills that you do have in order to stay relevant.
Dennis Yang, CEO of the online learning platform Udemy. Another tech company is filing for an IPO. AppDynamics plans to list on the NASDAQ under the ticket APPD. The San Francisco-based company helps businesses track how well their apps and websites are running so they can respond swiftly to connection slowdowns or crashes. Facebook has some more competition in the live video front. Twitter has updated its streaming service, Periscope. It will now feature 360-degree live videos that can connect directly onto the service. This move is part of a renewed focus among social media firms on gaining traction during live events. The feature allows users to tilt and rotate their phone for a full panoramic scene. Coming up, the short seller's warning that rattled Nvidia. Will one of 2016's best tech growth stories become a 2017 cautionary tale? This is Bloomberg. It was a big week for chip makers. Qualcomm was slapped with an $853 million fine in South Korea for violating antitrust laws, raising new questions over the profitability of its licensing business. While shares in Nvidia fell the most in 19 months after Citron Research came out bearish on the company, saying the stock belongs at $90. We broke it down with Bloomberg editor-at-large Corey Johnson and Bloomberg Technologies' Ian King.
Well, there are a lot of risks which everybody's been sort of pointing out for some time. He isn't really breaking a lot of new ground. What he's saying is that this is a company which has done well in gaming. A lot of the growth that it's actually put up has come from gaming. All of these new markets, the automotive, the AI stuff, they're fine, but they're relatively limited at this point. And he's pointing out that, you know, a lot of what the new news story hasn't really manifested itself, and it faces a lot of competition there.
You dig into the Bloomberg, you look at some of these technical indicators. I was checking out the RSI Relative Strength Index. It was well above 70. Absolutely. We're now passing back down after the slump. It was the worst day in 6 months for the stock, but still, if $90 is the call, that's still some 18% to go. How much, Corey, should we be listening to these calls coming from Andrew Left? I know you know him.
Andrew Left is a genius, but maybe not in this case. I like Andrew Left a lot.
He was about Valiant Pharmaceuticals. That's where he really got his name, right?
Yeah, he's had some good calls over the years. I shouldn't call him calls. He does some really good research, or has access to some other good research, but it tends to be in more obscure names, and it tends to be smaller cap stuff. That's the place where I think he adds the most value. When it comes to big cap names that he's called overvalued and things, I don't think that that's his very best suit. NVIDIA, Facebook, for example. I think these are companies where his research is not sort of is so unique and out there on its own. He's just kind of calling the question some valuation issues and not really fundamental issues of the companies. Again, I think he does really terrific work on some smaller names, but in this case, it's not his best work. It's a holiday week, so we'll give Andy a break.
And let's face it, it didn't quite wipe out some of the moves that we saw yesterday on Nvidia in the higher side.
Now, yes.
Give us a sense, though, we've got to dig into other chip makers here. Qualcomm.
That's right.
And fascinating that we finally get the fine coming out of South Korea, but this just adds to China. How worrying is this when we look at US, Europe? It's not the only place it's being investigated.
Yeah, I mean, the fine is the headline, but really, who cares? I mean, $800 million to somebody like Corey or Qualcomm, it's nothing, right? There's a lot of money floating around there. People are much more concerned. Much more concerned about the business model, which, you know, 70% of their profit comes from licensing revenue. So anything that potentially affects how they're able to levy licenses on phones, that's a big deal, and that's the cumulative concern that's always been there and looks like it's manifesting itself a little bit more.
But it seems like this also gets to the core of what Qualcomm is and how it's different than most chip makers out there, not just because it relies so much on intellectual property and licensing inventions as opposed to selling the physical chips that they make, but also that they have, with that business model, achieved market dominance such that their licenses or their technologies are written into the very code that makes mobile telephony work.
Right.
So you can't really make mobile telephony without Qualcomm chips.
Well, that's precisely their argument. Without us, you're nothing. The modern world wouldn't exist, in the sense that we've come to be used to it. So we should be getting our cut of that. So please hand over your money. And so far, the courts have supported them. And what you've got to remember is they've been battling in and out of the courts everywhere around the world about the very fundamentals that South Korea found them guilty of transgressing yesterday for years, literally for more than a decade. And what happens is they tend to win.
But in China, they have had to potentially reorientate the way in which they price their products?
Well, that is the one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it, which the stock market looked at it and said, was actually, they weren't really allowed to do business in China at all. So fair enough, this is a reduced rate. That's not a good trend. But they weren't allowed to do business there before.
That seemed very much like a glass half full reaction to what the news was out of China when that settlement happened, because when I effectively look at that as a settlement, because fundamentally China said you can't do your business here at all, but then they have to do it at such a lower rate and a less rate. And I'm curious, also what you think of the argument, the Korean argument that says they can't or they shouldn't be allowed to bill against the entire handset, just against the chip. Well, how could that differ in their sort of regime of structure?
Yeah. I mean, that's an absolutely huge deal. This is something that they've had to fight around the world in other places. In China, that was the concern, as what would happen there. Because, a chip, $30, a handset, $700, $800 if you look at the full retail price. Obviously, 5%, 3% of $30 is a lot less than what they're getting right now.
How much could this impact R&D going forward? I mean, this is their argument, the fact that our patenting, our licenses, the amount that we charge helps us refuel our research and development, help the ecosystem, but also it helps them in particular. It gives them a leading edge.
Right.
Is this a boon? Who should we see if Qualcomm does continue to see these sorts of concerns, and if we do see the share price continue to drop, who's the beneficiary on the flip side?
Well, the beneficiary initially would be the handset makers, people like Samsung, and that's obviously what Qualcomm would argue is behind this. Yeah. They're going to be paying a lower rate, and so that for them that helps their margins.
But Nvidia might be quite pleased. There's an element were there some anger towards Qualcomm in years gone by that perhaps they undercut the market, suppressed prices much below than it would to drive out sort of competition.
I mean, there's been no price gouging. The arguments has been that they built this market position, which was almost 100% in some technologies at one point. Nvidia failed in mobile because they underestimated the power of the modem. That's a very different thing. It wasn't anything to do with Qualcomm's actual power there. There were other companies that were a lot stronger than Qualcomm in the past. Qualcomm bet on the right technology at the right time. That gave them this initial lead. There are obviously arguments about what they've done with this market power, but the technology decisions and the technology bets that were made back at the beginning of digital were won by Qualcomm.
Bloomberg Technology's Ian King and Bloomberg editor-at-large, Corey Johnson. Facebook and Google reigned supreme in the 2016 app wars. The two Silicon Valley giants dominated the new list of this year's top apps, according to Nielsen. Facebook nabbed the #1 spot on the list with more than 146 million average unique users per month, a 14% growth over the last year. Not to be outdone, the company known for the world's most popular search engine grabbed the most spots on the list. YouTube, Google Maps, Google Search and email service Gmail all made it into the top 10. Coming up, we'll continue our focus on the tech breakthroughs of 2016 with a look at reusable rockets, the hits and the misses. That's next. This is Bloomberg. 2016 was the year of populist movements from Brexit to the Trump election. But perhaps ironically, the world's wealthiest seemed to benefit from the move against globalization, adding $237 billion to their coffers. That's according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. And when you break it down by industry, technology fortunes were the second best performing in the rankings, with 55 billionaires adding $50 billion to their net worth over the year, despite worries that a Trump presidency might introduce policies that could hurt their companies. Warren Buffett holds the top spot, gaining the most net worth over the year, while Microsoft founder Bill Gates and Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos are in the top 5. And you can get a full picture of the Bloomberg Billionaires Index on the Bloomberg at Rich Go. 2016 was also a year of dramatic progress for the commercial space industry's aim to cut the cost of spaceflight. Elon Musk's SpaceX and Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin both proved with a string of successful landings that reusable rockets are key to slashing the price of a launch by millions. But not all attempts were out of this world. Bloomberg's Kaylin Meehan reports.
Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket.
2016 proved there's a new kind of space race underway, one to develop reusable rockets and dramatically cut the cost of a launch. Here's why that matters. SpaceX already leads the industry on cost at $61.2 million for a Falcon 9 launch. Its rival United Launch Alliance says it can't get the price under $100 million until 2019. SpaceX believes that recycling the first stage rocket could slash its price of spaceflight by a factor of 100. Which is why this year was so important. After 4 failed attempts to land a first-stage rocket on a floating barge, SpaceX made history in April, sticking a controlled landing on a moving target. It went on to record 3 more ocean landings this year and 2 on land.
Imagine if after every one-way flight of an airplane, you threw it away. It would cost you many hundreds of millions of dollars to fly anywhere. That describes the rocket industry today. If instead you could reuse the rocket, it'd be like air flight. It would be as inexpensive as air flight to go around the Earth and land again. That's exactly what SpaceX is doing.
And it's not the only one. Blue Origin, which is run by Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, is also testing this, but for suborbital flights. It's had 5 successes to date. But SpaceX's streak of luck ended abruptly on September 1st. An accident while fueling led to an explosion on the launch pad.
They were fueling up the second stage, probably. It is fueled with liquid oxygen and kerosene. It's a mix, so it's obviously highly flammable, so it doesn't take much to cause a spark and perhaps an explosion of this magnitude.
3 months later, that accident has had a domino effect on the company's launch schedule. SpaceX remains grounded, and plans to resume flight in December were pushed to January. Its even more ambitious plan for a manned mission has been pushed from 2017 to May of 2018. But experts aren't too worried about the impact on the industry as a whole.
In 5 short years, this company has become the establishment player within the launch services industry, and to come so far in such a short amount of time and have had as few problems as they've had is really amazing.
SpaceX still has a backlog of more than 70 missions worth more than $10 billion.
That was Bloomberg's Caitlin Meehan reporting. That does it for this edition of Best of Bloomberg Technology. Make sure you join us next week, where we will be speaking with AOL CEO Tim Armstrong. Plus, we'll be joined by Fitbit CEO James Park and get his reaction to the company's app reaching the top spot on the Apple App Store chart over the holidays. And of course, we'll bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. Tune in every day, 5 p.m. New York, 2 p.m. San Francisco, 6 a.m. in Hong Kong. Remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.
We're operating at a different frequency, at a different scale, right? We care about different things.
It's diversified, it's a true ecosystem.
You're really changing industries and you're changing processes. You need those skills, you need that information.